Have you ever wondered why you carry a weight you don't understand? Why, when you walk into a room, do you sense someone's sadness before it's even spoken? Why do you cry over pains that aren't yours, dream of memories you haven't experienced, grow weary from battles you haven't fought? Perhaps you believed this was just sensitivity, that you were born to be kind, welcoming, the person everyone turns to. But the truth is much greater, and much more dangerous. Carl Jung left us a warning about empaths, a warning that almost no one has had the courage to heed. A warning for those who confuse compassion with sacrifice, presence with dissolution, love with self-destruction. Because feeling too much is not, in itself, a gift. It can also be an invitation to one's own downfall. Empathy, as celebrated today, always seems gentle and luminous, as if being empathetic were a risk-free gift. But Jung saw beyond this spiritualized caricature. He saw empathy as a gateway to the collective unconscious, a door that can open to light but also to abysses. Because the empath doesn't just perceive what others feel. They absorb what they cannot carry. They become a sanctuary for the shadows rejected by others. And, if they're not careful, they can be devoured by them. How many times have you felt drained for no reason? Angry for no reason? Deeply sad without understanding where it came from? This is the price of opening doors without learning to close them. The unconscious empath becomes a psychic graveyard for everything others avoid feeling. They become a cracked mirror, reflecting pain that isn't theirs, carrying ghosts that don't belong to them. In dreams, Jung saw these figures as blind women trembling on bridges, men walking in mirrored cathedrals without recognizing their own faces, children crying from wounds inherited from previous generations. All of them confusing their own souls with the voices echoing around them. All of them believing that to be good was to disappear so that others would fit in. The truth almost no one dares to say is that empathy can be used as an escape. We run from ourselves while drowning in others. We run from our own anger by embracing the anger of others. We run from our loneliness by caring for the pain of others. And, deep down, we begin to believe that we only deserve love when we are needed. Jung reminded us that everything that hurts us in others is also an invitation to look within. The same goes for what moves us. Why, after all, do you feel so much? What wound of yours is trying to be filled when you immerse yourself in the suffering of others? What hidden need is satisfied by always being the one who endures? Being empathetic isn't wrong. Feeling isn't wrong. But confusing empathy with fusion is dangerous. Confusing help with selflessness is dangerous. Confusing love with self-abandonment is dangerous. The true empath is not the one who dissolves into the other, but the one who can remain whole even while reaching out. He says, "I feel you, but I am not you." He learns to witness pain without becoming it. He understands that compassion doesn't require self-sacrifice, it requires awareness. This awareness begins when you descend into the basement of your own psyche and ask, whose pain do I carry? What in me still believes it needs to bleed to prove it deserves to exist? Who was I before I was needed by everyone else? The answers are painful, but liberating. Because they show you that you weren't born to be a graveyard for other people's sorrows. You weren't born to be an altar where others deposit their shadows. You were born to be a vessel, capable of containing and returning light without emptying yourself completely. Jung said that every light casts a shadow, and empathy is perhaps one of the most dangerous lights, because its shadow is silent. It's the shadow that turns care into dependence, that turns acceptance into manipulation, that turns kindness into martyrdom. The unconscious empath believes they are only truly human when they carry the pain of others. The conscious empath understands that they can only offer true love when they don't forget to love themselves. So, take a deep breath now and ask yourself, how much pain are you carrying that isn't yours? How many masks have you donned to be the anchor for those who never wanted to swim alone? Who would you be if you left all this on the ground? Because feeling is beautiful, but feeling everything can be fatal. It's time to transform your empathy from wound to strength, from sponge to mirror, from martyr to presence. Not to harden yourself, but to finally be whole, so that when you look in the mirror, you see yourself, and not just the echo of others. And perhaps, now that you begin to see the shadow hidden behind your empathy, an even greater doubt arises within you. So who am I without it? Because silently, you've already realized that the way you feel about others has also shaped who you believe yourself to be. It's always been this way. The child who sensed the tense atmosphere at home and tried to please to calm their parents. The teenager who listened to their friends' problems without ever confessing their own. The adult who carries everyone on their shoulders because no one else seems capable. And yet, a voice whispers inside you, "This can't be all that I am." But it's hard to let go of the caregiver's skin. There's a strange feeling of emptiness when you stop absorbing. A dizziness, as if the ground has been ripped from under your feet. Because your entire identity was built on this gift. A gift that became a shield that became a prison. Jung knew that the most powerful gifts are those that most easily enslave us. He said that no one attains enlightenment by imagining figures of light, but by making darkness conscious. And what you're beginning to see now is that your empathy, as beautiful as it is, also has a dark side. A side that makes you believe your role in the world is to put out fires. That you're only worth something when you feel for everyone. That your usefulness justifies your existence. So right now, I want you to honestly look inside and ask, why do I feel such a need to be needed? This question may hurt, but it is crucial. I remember a patient who repeatedly dreamed of carrying a huge sack through the streets. People applauded as she walked, but no one helped her carry it. Every time she considered dropping the burden, she heard a chorus, "You can't. What if someone needs it?" She would wake up sweaty, with a tight chest. Until one day, in therapy, she cried and said, "But I don't know who I am without it." And it was at that moment that she began to find herself. Because when you dare to lay your burden down, you realize it was never yours to begin with. You've been conditioned to believe that feeling the pain of others is an act of love. But the truth is, love doesn't require you to disappear in order to exist. Make no mistake, this change doesn't happen overnight. Letting go of the unconscious caretaker role takes courage. Because underneath it lies fear. Fear of being rejected. Fear of being seen as selfish. Fear of no longer being loved. But these fears only hold power until you face them head-on. When you choose to stop dissolving into others, it may feel selfish at first. But it's not selfish to tend your own garden. It's not selfish to protect your own roots so your tree can bear true fruit, not fruit stolen from your life force. And here's the secret Jung reminded us. Only those who are whole can offer true love. Because only those who are anchored in themselves don't try to control others with their own kindness. Only those who are rooted can reach out without falling. So take a deep breath. Allow yourself to imagine, for a moment, who you would be if you didn't have to carry anyone. What would your life be like if you offered support without letting others' pain change your compass? What would your peace be like if you said no without guilt and yes, only when you truly felt like giving? That's what this journey is for. Not to harden you, but to bring you back to yourself. And if this reflection touched something within you, if it made sense to hear these truths that almost no one dares to speak, know that there is still much more to discover. So, sign up to continue walking with me through this labyrinth that is the soul of empaths. Because the path is long, but each step brings us closer to our truth, to our peace, to our strength, to who we are beneath all the masks we once learned to wear. And when you begin to imagine, still cautiously, who you could be without carrying the burden of others, a new sensation emerges, as strange as it is uncomfortable. A silence. An empty space that was previously occupied by the noise of other people's pain, by urgencies that weren't yours, by expectations you were always rushing to meet. This silence is frightening because it forces you to truly look at yourself. And, at first, it's common to realize that you don't quite know who this person is when they're not trying to save anyone. For years, you were the anchor, the friendly shoulder, the silent wall everyone leaned on. But what happens when no one else does? When you finally put down everything you've been carrying? What's left? Who are you without the role that has always defined you? This is the most difficult question an empath can ask themselves. Because it reveals a truth many don't want to see. Hypersensitivity to others can be a cover for insensitivity to oneself. An escape. A way to avoid facing one's own pain, one's own emptiness. Jung spoke of the danger of the persona, that mask we wear to be accepted. For you, the persona is that of the caregiver. But it's not your whole truth. It hides layers you haven't yet allowed yourself to explore. Like the anger you repress to avoid disappointing anyone. Like the sadness you bury to keep smiling. Like the loneliness you disguise by offering presents to others. I remember a man who once came to me, exhausted. He was known by everyone as generous, tireless, the best friend anyone could have. But in our most intimate encounters between sighs, he would confess, "When I'm alone, I feel such an emptiness that it seems to swallow me." And so he filled himself with tasks, people, problems to solve, also he wouldn't have to face that silence. This is what happens when we confuse empathy with purpose. We feel like we only exist if we're carrying the world. But that's not purpose. It's fear. It's fear of discovering what's behind the mask. Fear of hearing our own voices screaming in the dark. And yet, that's exactly what needs to be done. It's in the silence that you begin to remember. To remember your desires, your limits, your dreams, the parts of yourself that have been stifled to fit into others' expectations. It may seem confusing at first. You might feel guilty about saying no. You might fear appearing cold by walking away. You might feel anxious about no longer being indispensable to everyone around you. But little by little, you'll realize that no one disappears just because they stop being a crutch. On the contrary, you finally begin to truly exist. Because there's no point in being a mirror for others if you've never had the courage to look at yourself. There's no point in being a harbor for others if you yourself live adrift. There's no point in carrying everyone if, in the end, you abandon yourself. Jung said that individuation, the path to becoming whole, begins when we stop identifying with our persona and have the courage to confront our own shadow. This shadow, which, in you, may be the insatiable need to be needed. The difficulty in recognizing that you also have limits. The fear of not being loved if you're not saving someone. But the truth is, we can only love and be loved fully when we stop playing roles. When we show ourselves completely, including our flaws, our weaknesses, our needs. So, even if it hurts, allow yourself to feel the silence. Allow yourself to not know who you are for a while. Allow yourself to unlearn being the anchor so you can relearn being you. Because only when you inhabit this empty space do you begin to fill it with something true. With who you truly are, not what the world wants you to be. And that's when your empathy stops being a prison and becomes a gift. Because you stop feeling to erase yourself and start feeling to connect. Without losing yourself. Without nullifying yourself. Simply being who you've always been, beneath all the layers you once believed were necessary to be loved. And as you remain in this silence, in this unknown territory between what has always been for others and what is finally beginning to be for you, a new awareness emerges. The empty space is not a punishment. It is an invitation. An invitation to look at yourself with the same tenderness you have always offered others. To direct your empathy inward and discover that, beneath all the masks, there is still a heart that needs to be seen, cared for, heard, acknowledged. At first, this may seem nearly impossible. You've spent your life training your gaze outward, capturing the slightest changes in the tone of voice, the sparkle in the eyes, the weight of the air around you. You've become adept at sensing the unspoken things of others. But you've rarely asked yourself, and me? How am I? What do I want? What do I need? Who am I, without carrying anyone? This is the work no one applauds. The work that isn't pretty to the viewer. The work only you can do. Look at yourself without being ashamed of what you find. Because, when you close your eyes, perhaps you realize there's an old weariness inside you. A heart that still bleeds from being forgotten for so long. A rage you never allowed to surface. A loneliness that was masked behind all the smiles you offered. Jung said there is no growth without descent. There is no true light without first facing one's own darkness. And for those who have always hidden behind caring for others, this darkness has a name, your own needs. And you have many, even if you're still afraid to admit them. Yes, you need it too. You need rest. You need a hug. You need boundaries. You need to be loved without having to bleed for it. You need to be heard without having to beg for attention. You need to be recognized not for how much you can handle, but for who you truly are. Acknowledging these needs doesn't make you less worthy. It doesn't make you selfish. It makes you human. There's a story I like to tell about a patient who, after years of caring for a depressed mother, lost siblings, and addicted friends, finally said out loud for the first time, "I'm tired too." He cried like a child. Not from weakness, but from relief. As if, finally, he was allowed to exist outside the role the world had imposed on him. When he finished crying, he said, "I never knew what breathing was like for me." This is what happens when you start choosing yourself. You finally stop being a specter inhabiting others' lives and start living your own skin. Not to abandon those you love, but to avoid abandoning yourself again in their name. And in the process, you discover that there's something precious waiting for you, your own presence. And this change doesn't just transform you, it transforms everything. Because when you start seeing yourself, the people around you start seeing you too. Not just as someone always ready to save, but as someone who also has a heart, a story, a truth. And that, believe me, inspires more than any silent effort to carry the world. You'll realize that not everyone will like this new version of you. Not everyone will applaud your no's, your pauses, your limits. Some might even call you cold, selfish, ungrateful. Because it's easier to admire you when you sacrifice yourself than to truly love you when you assert yourself. But that says more about their expectations than about your truth. You don't exist to be a cushion for them to vent their frustrations on. You exist to be whole. And being whole sometimes means disappointing those who only liked you when you broke yourself into pieces to fit their needs. Keep going. Breathe. Resist the temptation to become just a reflection of others' pain. Resist the urge to sacrifice yourself to avoid conflict. Resist the idea that love and suffering are the same thing. Say, because even if the beginning is lonely, you will soon discover that true companionship is born when you learn to inhabit your own soul. And if these words are echoing within you now, if they've opened a crack where before there was only silence, leave a gesture of gratitude to yourself. An acknowledgement of this step. Because every small choice you make to return to yourself is an immense victory that the world rarely notices, but you feel. And if you felt this message spoke to you, if something in you took a deep breath reading this, enjoy this moment. Take it to record, to remind yourself that, today, you chose to put yourself first for a moment. Because learning to see yourself, to hear yourself, and to choose yourself is also an act of courage. And every act of courage deserves to be honored. And as you begin to stay longer in this still uncomfortable but increasingly familiar state, a new challenge arises. Realizing that taking care of yourself doesn't just mean setting limits on others, but also recognizing the inner voices that still insist on holding you back. It's easy to imagine that by choosing yourself, all conflicts would cease. But the truth is, the hardest battle isn't with the world, it's with the parts of you that still believe you don't deserve peace. These parts, silent but persistent, whisper that you are only worthy when you help. That being loved requires sacrifice. That choosing yourself is betraying those who need you. That saying no is cruel. You begin to realize these voices aren't new. They're ancient echoes, formed long before you were even aware of them. They're memories you don't revisit often, but they silently guide your decisions. The first time you realized you needed to smile even when you were sad so as not to worry your mother. The night you lay awake, listening to your father's heavy footsteps down the hallway, trying to anticipate the next outburst. The days when, as a child, you hid your own tears to comfort your younger siblings. These memories aren't just distant recollections. They're roots. And until they're seen and understood, they continue to fuel this compulsion to disappear for the sake of others. So you need to look back and recognize that child did what they had to do to survive. They were wise with the little they could. But you're no longer that child. This recognition hurts. Because as exhausting as it is, the caregiver identity is still familiar. It protected you. It gave meaning to your life. It made you necessary. It was your way of staying safe in a chaotic world. But now that you know there's more to this role, you need the courage to let go. Not out of ingratitude, but out of self-love. When you begin to separate what belongs to others and what belongs to you, something begins to change in how you perceive the people around you. Before, every tear you saw felt like a cry for help directed at you. Every anger seemed like an invitation to fix the other person. Every silence felt like an obligation to fulfill. But now, with greater awareness, you begin to understand. Not all the pain you feel in others wants or needs to be carried by you. Not everyone wants to be saved. Not every shadow wants to be illuminated. And not every storm you feel around you is your responsibility. Some people carry pain that only they can choose to face. Some souls choose to remain in the darkness until they are ready for the light. And there is immense wisdom in knowing that you can be present without becoming a prisoner of another's pain. Little by little, you realize that true love isn't about fusion. Love is about presence with respect. It's about being able to hold someone's hand without ripping your own off to do so. It's about being able to witness another's pain without robbing them of the chance to learn from it. Because sometimes the lesson pain teaches is exactly what the other person needs to grow. And then you begin to experience something new. The weight lifts. Because for the first time, you understand that you weren't born to be a graveyard for other people's pain. You were born to be a mirror, to show people not their wounds, but what they can still be. To reflect the possibility of being whole, without anyone having to tear themselves apart. This is the point where you realize that empathy hasn't disappeared. It's simply matured. It's gone from being an unconscious impulse to a conscious choice. Now you choose when, how, and for whom to make room. Now you choose what enters your heart and what stays out. And as difficult as it may be, you understand that this discernment doesn't diminish your kindness. It strengthens it. Because those who don't protect themselves have nothing to offer but exhaustion. Because those who don't know how to say no end up telling lies with every yes. Because those who don't respect their own soul, no matter how much they love others, will never teach them to love themselves. And you feel it now, a new kind of silence. No longer the uncomfortable silence of emptiness. No longer the echo of ancient voices begging you to sacrifice yourself again. But the serene silence of someone who finally belongs to themselves. The silence of someone who no longer needs to prove themselves useful to exist. The silence of someone who discovers they are worthy even when they aren't saving anyone. And it's in this silence that you begin to blossom. Because, for the first time, you're no longer living to be needed, you're living to be true. Because you weren't born to be anyone's cure at your own expense. You were born to be whole. And whole, you can finally offer the world the best of yourself without ever again losing your way. And as you remain in this new serene silence, a new awareness begins to emerge. Slowly but inevitably, like the sun that insists on rising even after the longest night. You notice that, beyond the changes within you, there's also an inevitable movement outside. The way people perceive you and approach you is no longer the same. Before, it seemed natural for everyone to come to you. As if an invisible magnet drew the pain, the anguish, the urges of everyone around you to your hands. And you, reflexively, welcomed each of them, without ever asking if you truly needed or wanted them. It was as if his mere presence said, "I can handle it. I can handle it. I can handle it." And for so long you believed this was love, kindness, even an inevitable fate. As if there were no other way to be than this. Always ready, always open, always available to others, even when it meant having nothing left of you for yourself. But now, something has changed. You've started saying no. At first, timidly, almost as if apologizing for daring to set a limit. Then, more firmly, learning to stand your ground without guilt. And the reactions have been varied: surprise, hurt, even indignation. Because, for many, you were nothing more than a safe haven to turn to without ever giving anything in return. It's painful to realize this. Painful to realize who was only by your side while they could consume you, who only knew how to love the version of you that nullified itself, who mistook your generosity for obligation. But it's also liberating. Because you understand, once and for all, that you are not responsible for the emptiness of others. You are not anyone's cure. You are not the lifeline that keeps others from sinking. There's an initial loneliness in this discovery. A feeling that, as you begin to choose yourself, you lose a bit of the world. And it's true, you do. You lose relationships that fed on your silence, your exhaustion, your inability to set boundaries. You lose the false admiration that came from your constant sacrifice. You lose the acceptance you bought at the cost of your own soul. But little by little, you realize, these losses aren't really losses. They're liberations. Each one makes room for something new, a healthier love, more reciprocal friendships, more sincere connections. Because now you no longer offer yourself as a carpet for others' feet. Now you walk tall, and only accept by your side those who also know how to walk independently. It's at this moment that you begin to realize another truth. The empathy you've always carried hasn't disappeared. It's simply transformed. It's no longer a blind compulsion, a childish need to be needed. It's become a choice. It's matured into conscious compassion, the kind that knows when to reach out and when to pull away, when to reach out and when to let the other learn for themselves. This is one of the hardest lessons for an empath, realizing that not everyone wants to be saved, that not all pain needs to be embraced, that there are wounds that can only be healed by the one who carries them in the time and pace they require. And you also begin to realize something you might never have dared admit. By sacrificing yourself so others wouldn't feel pain, you were preventing them from growing. You were preventing them from facing the consequences, from learning from their failures, from developing their own strength. You were confusing care with control, love with overwhelm. And it's at this point that empathy becomes truly mature. Because you finally understand that loving someone isn't about preventing them from suffering. Loving is allowing them to walk on their own, even if they stumble, even if they fall. Loving is being present, but not replacing. It's being a witness, not a martyr. And this understanding gives you something you've perhaps never truly felt: lightness. For the first time, you don't carry the world on your shoulders. You don't feel like you have to solve everything, fix everyone, put out every fire. For the first time, you feel that it's enough to be who you are. That the greatest gift you can offer others isn't to fall apart for them, but to be whole for yourself. And that changes everything. Because, finally, you begin to realize that you've lost nothing by no longer being the receptacle for other people's pain. On the contrary, you've found yourself. You've discovered that your empathy is most powerful when chosen, not imposed. That your compassion is most genuine when it's not confused with fear. That your presence is most valuable when it's not dissolved to please. This is the beginning of a new way of being. A way of being where you don't live at the mercy of others' feelings. Where you don't confuse affection with servitude. Where you no longer need to beg for love by being everything to everyone. Where you finally breathe, lightly, in control of yourself. And, for the first time, you understand, the greatest gift you can give the world is to be whole. Because it is your wholeness that teaches others that they can be whole too. And as this new way of existing takes hold within you, an even deeper movement begins to take shape. It's not just how you interact with others that changes, but how you view the gift you carry. For years, perhaps your entire life, you confused sensitivity with obligation. You confused feeling with suffering. You confused love with sacrifice. And now, for the first time, you begin to see that your empathy wasn't the problem. The problem was not knowing what to do with it. In the silence you've conquered, you notice something that previously seemed impossible: the ability to discern. You feel the emotional currents of those around you, yes, but you no longer let yourself be dragged by them. You hear the pain of others, yes, but you no longer transform it into a wound within yourself. And, little by little, you begin to understand that this isn't a lack of love, it's its purest form. Because true love never asks you to nullify yourself in order to exist. Jung said that no one can become conscious without pain, and now you understand what he meant. The pain he felt when setting boundaries. The pain of losing those who didn't know how to stay when you put yourself first. The pain of looking at yourself and recognizing how many people you allowed to cross your own boundaries without ever asking for anything in return. It was all part of the process. And it was only because you had the courage to face this pain that you can now recognize a new kind of strength. The strength to not bow down to another's suffering. Not out of coldness, but out of clear-headed compassion. You've already understood that carrying another's pain in your chest doesn't lighten their burden, it only transfers the weight. And that the true gift you can give someone is to show them that they, too, are capable of standing on their own 2 feet. At this point in the journey, another challenge arises: realizing how your empathy still tries to sneak in. Sometimes, you still find yourself thinking, what if I don't help? What if he hates me for it? What if she thinks I don't care? This is the hardest part. Because the temptation to go back to being the person who pleases, who saves, who sacrifices herself to be loved is still there. Silent, waiting for a moment of fragility to speak louder. But now you have a resource you didn't have before: awareness. You can stop, breathe, and ask yourself, is this pain mine? Is this responsibility mine? Is this reaction really mine? And almost always the answer is no. And when you realize this, another discovery opens before you. The feeling that you are not alone. As you realize yourself as whole, You begin to see in the eyes of others the same struggle you experienced. Other sensitive, tired, fragmented souls, trying to understand where love for others ends and love for themselves begins. And this awakens a new desire in you. A desire to share, to tell your story, to say, "I've been there too. I've been confused too. I've been lost in other people's feelings too. I've forgotten myself too. But I can come back." Because when you free yourself, you inevitably become a mirror for others. Not a mirror of pain, as before, but a mirror of possibilities. That's why, even amid so much loss, you begin to gain something much more valuable: the ability to inspire without needing to burden. The ability to be a presence without needing to be a prison. The ability to be love without needing to be a martyr. And, in that moment, another understanding dawns. Empathy is not a punishment. It never was. It is, and always has been, a gift, but only for those who learn to use it without destroying themselves. Only for those who understand that before embracing the world, one must embrace oneself. Only for those who understand that it is not possible to give what one does not have. And here, in this state of clarity you've been searching for, I invite you to reflect. What has changed for you since you started setting boundaries? What have you discovered about who you truly are? How did it feel to finally look at yourself and realize that you, too, deserve care? If you want, write it down. Share it with someone. Because naming your own discoveries is a powerful way to make them real. And when you share, even silently, you remind the world, and yourself, that it is possible to feel without drowning, to love without losing yourself, to care without forgetting. And every time you choose to prioritize yourself without guilt, you are, without realizing it, helping other weary souls find the courage to do the same. Because, in the end, the world doesn't need you to sacrifice yourself to be good. The world needs you to be whole, to be true. And as this new way of being sinks into your every cell, something even deeper begins to blossom. It's not just an intellectual learning, nor just an emotional release. It's almost as if a new identity is being born within you. A silent recognition of something that has always been there, but that you've never been allowed to fully embrace. Your own humanity, whole and non-negotiable. For years, perhaps decades, you believed that the pain of others was also your responsibility. You were educated, molded, conditioned for this. At home, you might have been the child who noticed the heavy silence in the room and immediately adjusted, trying to avoid conflict. Maybe you were the one who brought joy when everyone else was sad, who measured every word so as not to hurt, who stifled your own tears to be the strong one, the example, the support. You became accustomed to being the emotional radar, the compass that guided the mood of everyone around you, the invisible glue that held the pieces together. And for a long time, this felt normal. It was the only way to be accepted. It was the price you paid to be loved. And so, every time you chose yourself, a pang of guilt came over you. As if, by taking care of yourself, you were betraying someone. As if loving yourself was an affront to those who always needed you to be available, tirelessly. But now, after this long journey inward, you begin to realize, you too are worthy. Worthy of existing beyond the pain of others. Worthy of breathing without bowing to every need of others. Worthy of being happy without carrying everyone's cross. This realization didn't come easily. It was born in the painful silence of nights when you felt selfish for setting limits. It was sown in tears you shed alone, feeling the weight of abandonment from those who couldn't handle your change. It was watered with fear, loneliness, and longing for the old dynamics that, though destructive, were familiar. And yet, you continued. Step by step, choice by choice, you reaffirmed to yourself, I deserve it too. I deserve rest. I deserve love that doesn't require me to disappear. I deserve bonds that don't depend on my pain to exist. And with this new perspective, you begin to see the world more clearly. You begin to perceive the subtle plots that sustain so many relationships. You see the dynamics of those who play the victim in order to manipulate. You see the hidden weight of those who project their shadows onto the most sensitive. You see how you yourself have been entangled in these webs so many times, believing that saving the other was your mission. Now you understand that sometimes helping someone too much prevents them from growing. That pain often needs to be faced to fulfill its purpose, to teach. That there are falls that no one can prevent, because they are necessary for the other to find their own strength. And you learn to contain yourself. You learn to watch without absorbing. You learn to love without losing yourself. You learn that your presence is enough. You don't have to dissolve to be important. And this doesn't make you cold. It doesn't make you less empathetic. On the contrary, now your empathy is clear, conscious, mature. Now you offer support without being contaminated. Now you witness without mutilating yourself. Now you feel without drowning. This is a new way of loving. A love that has roots and boundaries. That doesn't offer itself to be crushed, but that sustains itself, whole, to also support others by example. It's a love that doesn't suffocate, doesn't save by force, doesn't invade. It's a love that respects the pain of others without assuming it as a personal debt. And at this point in the journey, you realize you're no longer the person you were when it all began. Before, you were confused by the pain around you, like a cloudy mirror, unable to distinguish where the other ended and you began. Now, you're a clear mirror. A mirror that doesn't absorb, only reflects. A mirror that returns to the other their own image so they can face it themselves. And this transforms everything. Your relationships, your affections, your very dreams are transformed. You begin to dream again, but this time your own dreams. No longer shaped by the expectations of others, no longer small enough to fit the needs of others. Free, big, intimate dreams. Dreams that belong only to you. And in this new freedom, you begin to realize that your journey is also a beacon. Because by freeing yourself from the weight of pain that wasn't yours, you show others that it's possible too. You show that sensitivity isn't a sentence, it isn't weakness, it isn't a destiny of suffering. You show that feeling deeply can be a gift, but only when it's a choice, not an obligation. And it's inevitable that, when you realize this, you'll be inspired. You may not notice it right away, but it's already happening. Someone, silently, is watching you. Someone is learning to say no because of you. Someone is understanding that they, too, have the right to be whole because you dared to be. And you finally breathe. A long, deep, calm breath. Because now you know you didn't come into this world to lose yourself in the darkness of others. You came to light your own light, and thus illuminate paths. Not to save anyone, but to remind everyone that they can save themselves too. Because true empathy doesn't ask you to sacrifice yourself. It only asks that you remain human, whole, and, above all, true to yourself. And as you breathe deeper into this new truth, that empathy is a choice, not an obligation, you begin to see other layers of this journey, so subtle they previously went unnoticed. Because now, finally, there's enough silence within you to hear what was once muffled by the noise of others. A silence that isn't the absence of sound, but the presence of self. A vast, steady, inner space where you can rest without fear that someone will take even that from you. And it's within this silence that you realize, even though you've learned so much, even though you feel more whole, there are still throbbing wounds. There are still small impulses that try to drag you back to old dynamics. You realize that in certain encounters, in certain conversations, that old desire to solve everything for everyone still ignites within you, to prevent the other from suffering, to be needed at any cost. And for a moment, it's almost as if nothing has changed. But now you no longer confuse yourself with these impulses. You recognize them for what they are, remnants of a history that no longer defines you. Parts of you that are still learning to trust that you, too, deserve to be cared for. You breathe and remember, it's no longer your job to prevent others from feeling pain. It's no longer your job to be the bridge between them and their own responsibility. This recognition gives you a different kind of serenity. A mature serenity that no longer idealizes perfect relationships, but also no longer accepts dissolving yourself just to keep someone close. You begin to understand that it's not your job to convince anyone of your worth. You're not here to become indispensable, nor to be irreplaceable. You're here to be authentic, and that's enough. And it's when you internalize this that another truth begins to blossom. There's an almost magical beauty in being who you are, unapologetically. In being someone who feels deeply, but doesn't lose yourself in others. In being someone who truly loves, but doesn't forget in the process. There's a new beauty in looking at the people around you and realizing that you no longer need to be the glue that holds them together. They are responsible for their own broken pieces. And so are you. This beauty begins to transform the way you walk through the world. Where there was once anxiety, now there is peace. Where there was once fear of not being needed, now there is confidence in your own presence. Where you once asked permission to exist, now you simply take your place. And with that, the way you view yourself changes completely. You begin to see yourself with the same compassion you once only offered others. You begin to recognize the courage it took to get here. The strength of facing your own shadows, of breaking old patterns, of maintaining boundaries even when the world called you cold or selfish. You can finally see yourself not as someone who was weak for letting yourself be used, but as someone who was resilient for never stopping feeling, even in the midst of pain. And when you see yourself this way, you begin to realize your empathy was never a flaw. It just needed direction. It just needed your whole self to truly flourish. Now it's no longer a burden, but a light. It doesn't drag you down, but guides you. It doesn't define you, but complements you. And this new way of being shines through to everyone who comes near you. Some will be bothered by your newfound firmness. They'll try to remind you of who you used to be. The person who never said no, the person who always sacrificed herself, the person who let others make decisions for her. But you no longer fit into that narrative. Now you smile, silent, and remain centered within yourself. Without anger, without guilt, without the need to justify yourself. Others will be inspired by you. They'll approach you slowly, curious to understand how it's possible to be sensitive and strong at the same time. They'll notice in the sparkle in your eyes the living proof that it's possible to feel without being crushed. And that's when you realize your personal journey goes beyond you. It becomes a reminder to others that they can too. And perhaps this is the greatest revelation of all, that it's not enough to just protect yourself. It's not enough to just learn to say no. It's not enough to just set boundaries. You must also learn to fully experience the beauty of being who you are, without fear. You must be a living example that conscious empathy doesn't destroy, it transforms. And in that moment, at that point in the journey, you finally understand. You no longer need to beg for love at your own expense. You no longer need to prove yourself to be accepted. You no longer need to deny yourself to keep someone close. You are already enough. You are already whole. And those who don't know how to love someone whole still need to learn from themselves. And then you breathe. A long, deep, calm breath. And for the first time, you don't wonder if you're worthy. Because there's no longer any doubt. You always were. And now, you finally allow yourself to believe. And when you arrive here, at the end of this intimate journey, perhaps for the first time in a long time, you allow yourself to simply be. Without needing to prove anything to anyone, without needing to carry more than necessary, without needing to mold yourself to fit into the emptiness of others. You breathe and feel what once seemed impossible, lightness. Because now you no longer confuse love with sacrifice. Now you no longer believe that you are only worthy when you bleed for others. Now you understand that being whole is, in itself, the greatest form of empathy. Look back for a moment. Consider everything you've faced to get here. How many times you believed you couldn't set boundaries. How many nights you felt guilty for finally saying no. How many broken relationships, how many masks ripped off, how many bitter silences until you discovered that taking care of yourself wasn't selfish, but survival. And yet you came. Yet you insisted on being more than other people's expectations, more than labels, more than the old habit of denying yourself to maintain peace. You decided to see yourself, to choose yourself, to rise up again. That, in itself, is courage. That, in itself, makes you admirable. And that's why you walk differently now. The eyes of others still measure you, but they no longer weigh you down. The pain of others still reaches you, but it no longer pierces you. You still feel, because that will never cease to be who you are. But now you feel without losing yourself. Now you embrace without falling apart. Now you offer your light without letting them extinguish the flame within you. This is the true gift of the conscious empath. It's not carrying the world on your shoulders. It's being a reminder to the world that it's possible to walk lightly, even when feeling everything. It's being a mirror that reflects to others their own courage, their own capacity for healing. It's being an anchor, not a shackle. It's being a presence, not a prison. And perhaps, listening to all this, you recognized something within yourself. A flame burning deep within, however timid, however small. A reminder that you too are made of light and shadow, of love and limits. And perhaps you felt that this video was like a hug, a gentle push toward your own wholeness. If so, know that you deserve to honor this moment. Because you chose to be here. You chose to listen, reflect, feel. You chose yourself. And that's already a giant step for someone who, for so long, forgot to choose themselves. And I want you to know, you are not alone. There are many others, scattered throughout, who are also relearning to love without being erased, to care without being consumed, to live without fear of being whole. This space is for you. A place to share your stories, your discoveries, your pains, and your victories. So, if anything here touched you, I invite you to leave a comment with your thoughts on this journey. What words resonated most deeply with you? What part of you felt a desire to be seen after everything we've discussed here? Your story might be what someone else needs to give them the courage to take the first step. And if you feel that this transformation resonates with you, that this conversation has helped you remember what you already carry within you, I invite you to also like this video. This is a way to share this message with more people who, like you, deserve to discover that being sensitive isn't a sentence, it's a gift. And of course, if you want to continue walking with me on this path of self-knowledge and awareness, subscribe to the channel. Here you'll always find a safe space to reflect, learn, and remember who you truly are. Because, deep down, that's always been the purpose, to help you see yourself. To remember that you never needed to be a martyr to be loved. You never needed to be perfect to deserve rest. You never needed to erase yourself to be accepted. You were enough from the start. You just needed to remember. And now, with this memory alive within you, move on. Walk more calmly, with more presence, with more confidence in your own light. And whenever you need, come back here. Because this is your place too. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. Thank you for allowing yourself to feel, reflect, and transform. May you carry this learning with you throughout your life, and may it always be a gentle reminder, you are not here to carry the world. You are here to be whole. And being whole is everything.